Hey guys, so today's video is going to be something of a tutorial where I talk about some of the tips and tricks I've picked up filming wedding videos over the years. Now, I've done about half a dozen, but I did one a week ago and I've just finished editing it. And I kind of want to put some of my thoughts on the process down in video form so that next time I'm asked to film a wedding video, I can perhaps come back to this video and remember some of the things that I've picked up. And also, I kind of want to share my knowledge with you guys because filming a wedding video is a bit of a beast in and of itself. It's not like filming other kinds of events. It's not like filming, say, corporate events where there is almost like a uniform in how the video is supposed to come across, and it's not like filming sports events where the procedure again is very, very standard. But weddings are a little bit different and difficult. They're different in the sense that no two weddings really are the same, and each wedding has its own tone and its own pace, and sort of you as a cameraman slash videographer kind of have to sort of understand the pace and be able to film and edit accordingly, which can be kind of difficult. And also as well, because of the nature of the wedding, you have to get everything sort of, you have to get pretty much the essential stuff on camera, and you can't sort of redo it as well. So you have to make sure that it goes right the first time, which means that you sort of have to take extra care and be extra careful as well. Okay, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about the equipment, the preparation, the filming and the editing, and I'm going to talk about the sound as well quite a lot, because I've actually found the sound to be one of the more difficult things when it comes to recording a wedding video, and one which a lot of people often overlook as well. Now, I'm going to try and keep this as brisk as possible, but there's a lot to cover here, so it may be a little bit longer than I'm hoping. Okay, so anyway, onto the equipment first. Now, the equipment is reasonably straightforward. You want at least 2 cameras. Now, they don't necessarily have to be particularly fantastic cameras. This one here, which I used as my camera 2, is it's a Canon Liegra HFR 206. I picked this up for about 150 British pounds, which is about 250 American dollars. That was first hand with a whole bunch of warranty and stuff on it as well. So you might be able to get one of these type of cameras significantly cheaper, maybe if you go second hand or look for a model down. Now, the problem with these kind of cameras, the big problem, which I'll talk about tackling later, is the sound. The sound on them is tinny and it's horrible, and it picks up all kinds of other ambient stuff that you don't want picked up. So don't buy these for its sound, just buy it for its picture. This can record up to 50 frames per second, although the final result will probably be in the region of 30 or maybe 25 frames per second. And it can film 1080 HD as well, which is about as high as you're going to want to go. You might not even necessarily need to do HD at all if you prefer to keep things particularly simple, but it's nice to have that option there. It also comes with a whole bunch of lenses, but you won't really need them. What is useful though is to have one of these rings that can go on it, one of these things that guard it from sort of the sun going directly into the lens, and it can actually end up messing up your shot. It's just a nice thing to have. It's not necessarily particularly essential, and you'll want at least 2 of these. Make sure that the battery lasts long enough for the event. This one here has an hour and a half. The one that I'm actually recording this on has a battery life of about 5 hours. Make sure, of course, that your SD cards can go the distance as well, and make sure that you obviously set the what you'll really want to do is get a solid quality SD card. You want to get like a named brand as well, because cheap SD cards can sort of corrupt on you when you least want them to. Because again, you want to have, like, if you're going to get quality out of all of this, the SD cards are certainly where you want to spend the money, because again, you don't want lost footage. That would just be an absolute nightmare. So what you want at least 2 of these. You can actually now, when it comes to actually setting up the camera, which I'll talk about a little bit later, you'll want to do this. You'll almost certainly want tripods. Now, if you're using small flip cameras like these, then you can get away with having small, lightweight tripods like these, which are very inexpensive as well. They're also very small. You can actually fit quite a few of them into a backpack. So you might want to take a couple of these as well. The camera, yeah, like I said, the camera that I'm actually recording this on, which is usually my main camera, has a significantly longer battery life and is actually, significantly better. But I actually managed to pick this up for about 150 quid, which is about 250 American dollars. But that was second hand, and it was an absolute steal on eBay, which I was very lucky to get my hands on. Okay, so yeah, you want at least 2 of these kind of cameras. And then for a third camera, I would recommend perhaps having like one of these stills cameras. A Panasonic Lumix, I hear, are quite good, which look a bit like that. They can actually record up to 1080p as well. Their quality isn't perfect, and they're quite sort of dependent on the lighting, but but it's nice to have one of these cameras just in your pocket, just to make sure that you can actually pick up any B-roll footage that you might not otherwise pick up if you didn't have a camera in your pocket. Sometimes it might be like the bride getting out of the car, sometimes it might be the groom arriving, sometimes it might just be something that you completely didn't anticipate for, but it would actually be kind of fun if you actually did end up getting it on camera. So it's nice to have just this as a bit of a backup, if nothing else. Again, maybe like if you had a really good video camera on your phone as well, that might possibly suffice. You don't want to do any sort of lengthy footage that way, because again, it's not likely to be on a stand, it's not likely to be particularly good quality. But like I say, if it's just for 3 seconds of B-roll, it's probably better to have it than not have it. Or at least, and again, you don't necessarily have to use it at the end. What you may want to do, and if you think you can, sort of deal with it, is actually have a third one of these, which is fine if you're willing to actually carry it around in your pocket, which is, again, it's a nice lightweight camera, and I really quite like these cameras because of their lightweightness, and you actually get a reasonably good picture quality as well, not only for the price as well, because when you shoot a lot outdoors, you do kind of want to be conscious of not taking out super expensive camera equipment that you're leaving on tripods unattended, because again, they might get broken, walked into, knocked, or whatever. So again, looking for brands that do good quality and good price as well is quite useful. Okay, so what I tend to do is I tend to put one camera right at the front, facing almost down the aisle, which is aimed at the bride's side. It's the bride's day, so you're going to want to focus on the bride more than the groom. Again, you're going to want to obviously talk to the couple ahead of time, but you're going to want to point the camera at the bride more than the groom. So you're going to kind of want to have 2 cameras, and I'll put them on a diagram which I'll put up there, and that's how you're going to want to set them up. Now, when it comes to audio, you're going to want to get a separate sound recorder. I've heard a lot of people refer to things like wireless mics and all this kind of business. No. On a wedding day, you want to keep it simple. Now, the sound on these cameras is pretty abysmal, but it's better than nothing, and it's not bad for a backup as well. So what you want to do is you want to record these with these cameras on automatic as is, really. Unless you're in a room that requires a particular, that's in a particular light, you might need to adjust the white balance, or if it's particularly dark, you might want to adjust the exposure. Generally speaking, the automatic is great on this. If it doesn't work exactly, you can always edit it out in post, but generally speaking, the automatic setting, it's fine on pretty much all cameras, so just, I wouldn't worry too much about that. So when it comes to sound, what you want to do is you want to record your sound completely separately of the video. That way, if the sound that you're recording gets buggered up for some reason or another, you do have the sound that comes out of either of your cameras. It's going to be pretty bad, but it's going to be better than losing your sound altogether. Whereas if your wireless mic messes up for one reason or another, and they do, or if the cable to your, if you're using a cable to get a microphone close to the bride and groom, if that for some reason someone steps on that and that comes unplugged, and again, that happens so much more than you might imagine as well. And again, it's one more thing to worry about. You've lost all of your audio, so or you risk losing all of your audio, and it can be really quite not something that you want to happen. So what you want to do is you want to have at least one of these. If you're feeling super prepared, might be worth taking a second. This is a Tascam DR07 Mark II. My second one of these is a Handy H1. Now the Handy H1 I recommend to anyone who wants to record audio on a budget, because the actual quality of sound for the price is fantastic. I picked mine up for about 40 quid, which is practically nothing, and the actual quality you get on that is fantastic. It's the Handy H1. Now you can get higher end Handy models, and I recommend you perhaps go for those if you can afford them. But like I say, my Handy H1 is just my secondary audio recorder. This is the one that I actually ended up using. This cost me 130 quid. So this costs as much as perhaps a low-end camera. But again, the audio quality you get out of this is worth it. And again, it's a separate. It records the audio as an MP3 or a WAV file on this device, completely independent of anything else. You can use it as a handheld microphone. What you can even do, and if you've got the time and things are going particularly well, and I haven't done this, but I have been at occasions where it would be worth me doing this, is to actually get one of these things, plug in a clip-on mic, like a little lavalier mic that can clip onto your lapel, and put it on the groom. So you can put that in like the groom's inside pocket, but it works better with the Handy H1 because it's just a lighter device, and then just have the little lavalier up here, not too close to the mouth, and have the volume setting on auto, and then it can pick up the bride, the registrar, or the vicar, or the priest, or whoever's doing the ceremony, and then you can pick up the groom as well. So you don't want it too close to the groom's mouth, otherwise the groom's volume will be significantly higher than everyone else's. But it's having a microphone in the middle of the ceremony, and it's having it quite well obfuscated as well. So if you have the ability to approach the groom and ask him to put on a lavalier mic, then obviously that might be something you want to go in for. Again, it's worth talking these things through. Obviously, don't assume everyone's willing and willing to participate in this. One of the things I've learned as a cameraman is that most of the time you pretty much have to be a ghost. You have to be out. You can't be in anyone's way. You have to very much blend into the background, and that applies particularly at weddings, because they tend to be high stress events. So only do this if the groom is standing around 20 minutes before the ceremony is due to start or anything like that, because it's a good place to get a microphone. Failing that, and which again I've never put on the lavalier mic, but again it's something that I would possibly consider maybe next time, is to actually just put this pointing obviously at the ceremony, maybe obfuscated, just sort of out of the way somewhere, just so that it can pick up as close to the bride and groom as possible. You want it away from the crowd as possible. Ideally, you want it pointing away from the crowd, maybe sort of coming in at one of the sides or something. But again, you're kind of at the mercy of your surroundings here. So you kind of just want to have this vaguely out of the way and pointing at them. You're also going to want to invest in wind shields, just so that obviously the wind doesn't go into the microphone and then mess up your sound. Also, a nice little trick that I've picked up is that when you're putting one of these devices down on, say, a flat surface like a desk or a sort of bit of the architecture or whatever, it's worth having a second windsock to go on the back, so that it's not making any direct contact with any of the surroundings. Because that, if this is actually touching the surroundings, it'll pick up every bit of sound that you don't want it to pick up, all the ambient sound, all the knocks, all the nudges. And what you want to do is you want to sort of protect the microphone from that. So you want to put a windsock on the front, a windsock on the back as well, and then just put it in. It might look a little bit funny, but it will benefit the sound all in all. So that's pretty good. Like I say, this is a DR07 Mark II. This is pretty good, and that handy H1 if you're looking for something on a budget. But it's definitely worth investing in at least the handy H1. One of the things that actually took me a surprisingly long time to learn is to actually learn to use the auto leveler. Very important to learn how to use the auto leveler. The auto leveler effectively just it weighs up the volume for you. There's a whole bunch of reasons why you want to use the auto leveler. I up until quite recently was doing it manually, and the problem with doing it manually is if you record at the same input volume, the round of applauses that inevitably happen will peak it and sound horrible. But a lot of the time as well, the spoken audio will be a lot quieter than you expect, because obviously you don't want to risk peaking it too much. And that means that you have to artificially compress and boost the speech, and that will lower the quality in and of itself as well. So just let the microphone do the work for you. It'll have some kind of peak reduction so that it prevents the applause from peaking too much. You'll get a higher quality there. And again, it'll just be less work to do in post. So, separate audio recorder. One, if you've got them and you're feeling luxurious, pack two, because you never know. Because if you are putting on a lavalier mic onto the groom, and I recommend doing it only onto the groom. The registrar obviously won't want to have any part of that. The bride will have a dress that quite likely will ruffle, and that's just terrible for sound. So the groom, who will most likely, presumably, be in a regular old suit, you'll just clip it onto the lapel, and you're almost good to go. I wouldn't rely on that. Lapel mics can go wrong. Sometimes the groom might be nervous and sort of readjust the suit, and it might interfere with some audio or something like that, or it might something might happen. Basically, it's always good to have a backup. So if you've got a second audio recorder, it might be worth having it from a distance, shotgun style. Because what you can't end up doing is constantly checking the groom's lavalier mic to make sure it's picking up. You have to set it, and you have to be happy with it. So again, having as many of these backup options as possible is quite good. It might sound, again, a little excessive to have 2 or 3 cameras and then 1 or 2 audio recorders on top of that. But again, you have to get you can't miss footage. You can't redo a wedding because you messed up the video editing or whatever. So, also, like I say, tripods. You can pick a load of them up really quite cheaply. If you're using small flip cameras like that, then the weight is quite fine. If you're renting cameras that are a little bit bigger than this, obviously you'll probably want to rent a tripod in accordance with it. These audio recorders also fit onto tripod stands as well, so that might be something you want to look into. When it comes to preparation for filming, I've covered a little bit of this already. There's a few things that you really want to do. Talk it through with the bride and groom first. That might seem a bit obvious, but again, it's worth doing, and also it's worth addressing. Some of the questions you might want to ask might be, how obvious do you want the cameras to be? If you want the cameras to be, if they don't, sometimes they mind or don't mind whether or not the cameras are in plain sight. Sometimes they want them tucked out of the way. Sometimes they want them completely obfuscated. Sometimes they don't mind if they're just like right up in the face. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Also, when it comes to preparation for the day, talk to the registrar or whoever's doing the ceremony. There's a few reasons why you want to do this. The first is, one of their reason is that they want to make sure that you know the legal ramifications and the legal business around filming a wedding, because there is a little bit of legal business that you have to be aware of. You can't actually film the couple signing the register. Now, depending on the ceremony, depends on where this signing actually takes place, and whether or not it's in angle shot. Talk it through with the registrar. Sometimes they're happy to keep the cameras on as long as they're pointing away from the signing. Sometimes they actually just would rather you just turn them off altogether. You've always got to end up, you know, sort of obeying the wishes of the registrar. They're the ones that sort of not make the rules, but they're the ones that effectively the rules come back on at the end of the day. So again, it's worth talking through sort of as much as possible with the registrar. Obviously, they're going to be busy on the day, but they will want to talk to you anyway. The registrar that I filmed, that I was talking to a week ago with the last wedding that I did, was actually very helpful and actually knew filming weddings particularly well. They actually managed to help me set up the cameras in the most ideal places because they knew the venue. And this was in regards to the lighting and where the bride was going to be and all that kind of stuff. And the registrar was actually quite savvy in the whole videography kind of thing, because they actually managed to set up the shots for me. So they actually managed to make sure that they were standing in the right place so that they weren't being obfuscated by the direct lines of cameras. So as I pointed out, I put one camera facing almost at the bride, but almost sort of facing down the aisle, as it were, and I'll show you on the diagram, and one almost to the right of the door where the bride comes in. And again, well, you're going to want to focus more on the bride than the groom. Obviously, it's a mutual kind of celebration, but with traditional weddings, it is the bride's day, and that's so you are going to kind of want to focus more on that side. That's generally sort of how it goes. Again, something you might want to discuss with the couple beforehand, but it's kind of like that unwritten rule, isn't it? It's the bride's day, so you kind of want to, if you're going to focus more on one side than the other, what you want to do is, as well, you want to have both of the cameras kind of pointing towards the bride's side, because that way, if both of the cameras are on the same side, you're not going to catch each camera in the shots. You don't want to have a camera in the shot of another camera. That's just, it's not really particularly a good way of doing things. So if they're both on the same side of the room, they should be on the groom's side of the room, facing on to the bride's side of the room, but also sort of almost up and down the aisle, so that they capture the ceremony itself. So that's and obviously what you want to do is you want to make sure that your cameras are fully charged. That's all common sense. When it comes to SD cards, if you are going to splash out on any part of your equipment, the SD cards are really, or the storage medium, whatever storage medium you're using, I'm assuming it's SD cards, you'll want to buy a named brand, and you'll want to buy quality, and you'll want to buy them obviously big enough to house all of the video on. Don't buy the cheapo ones, because sometimes they can corrupt on you when you least need it. You don't want to find out the hard way that you need to buy quality SD cards. I also say that because they're not particularly expensive to buy high quality SD cards as well. So there's that. So yeah, like I say, you want 2 to 3 cameras. This will do for a third camera because it's good just to have it on your pocket. You can shoot from the hip. You'll absolutely positively want an audio recorder. It records it separately, all in one unit. Wireless microphones and all that fancy business, no. Because if your audio recorder does fail on you, if the batteries for some reason aren't fully charged or whatever, you do have the audio from the camera as well to fall back on. It's not going to be as good, but it's going to be better than nothing. So, and of course, tripods, you're just going to need tripods, aren't you? That's just common sense. Also, another thing to put in your bag, you may or may not need it, but this blue tack type of stuff. Now, industry-specific stuff, actually, is a lot like this, but it's black, so that it doesn't actually mark your cameras. If you're renting, obviously you need to be wary of marking the cameras on this stuff. Since obviously I use my own equipment, I'm less fussy on it. But you never know when you need this stuff. Maybe it's to attach something where you think something might slip off or whatever. And again, you don't need it in many cases, but it's one of those things just to pack just in case, because it's good to sometimes secure a camera if you feel something's wobbling or rattling or whatever. So yeah, that's basically the case. Yeah, and also, yeah, like I say, learn to love the auto options on both the camera and the audio. That's particularly important. It took me ages to work that out, and I was having trouble with compressing and normalizing peaking audio from the applause, and then leveling the voice of the bride and the groom for numerous times. And it's possible to do it on manual, but you're just making so much more work for yourself. So much more work for yourself, when effectively the auto leveler on this, the auto level on the Handy H1's fine as well. It does the job for you. So it doesn't do the job for you. You still have to process it in post to a degree, but it helps a lot. It helps kind of anyway. Okay, so that's the equipment, and I've talked about talked about the preparation. I can't think of anything else there. But generally speaking, you don't want to get in people's ways. If you are going to put a lavalier mic on the groom, obviously you're going to want to ask beforehand. You're going to want to make sure there's plenty of time to do it, and you want to be comfortable with your equipment as well, because you can't keep checking. Obviously, use the auto leveler. You're going to have to process it in post more, and again, use the lightest, like the Handy H1, which is like the lightest audio recorder that I know of. That's fine, because you can put it in an inside pocket and you don't even know it's there. You can completely forget about it. Don't rely on the lavalier audio though. Have a backup plan for that. Either have a good mic on a camera or have one of these nearby. And again, you're going to have to use your imagination or your wit to actually work out somewhere good to put this. Obviously, each layout of every building is different. And the acoustics are different as well. That's again a big problem. You have to weigh up the acoustics, and you're going to have to sort of manage the echoiness of the hall, and they tend to be quite bad as well, which is why you want to get this mic as close to the bride and groom as possible. If you can have it on a stand nearby to them and they don't mind, then sort of go for that. If you can do it in a reasonably tasteful way without it sort of being up in everyone's face. But again, when it comes to putting these things on mic stands and tripods and so forth, these actually fit directly onto a tripod. You can end up just having a whole bunch of stuff on tripods and getting in everyone's way, and you want to be careful of that as well. So, like I say, it's a matter of using a lot of judgment here, and sort of knowing your options, if nothing else. Having these things on a tripod is also quite good, because again, it puts some distance between this device and like the floor or whatever, and other things that might nudge it and sort of knocks that might show up on the sound as well. So yeah, that's another possible reason why you might want to use a tripod. But again, keep it out of the way. Sort of know whether or not, or know how obvious or obfuscated that the bride and groom and everyone else want it to be as well. Sound is going to be the most difficult thing that you're going to have to deal with, though. So bear that in mind. But if you can get the sound down, if you can get a good sound, then everything else will fit into place quite nicely. Okay, so when it comes to actually filming the event, what you want to do, and again, I guess this goes back to the equipment, make sure you've got a good battery or spare batteries or whatever. Now, your bog standard camera like this will last for about an hour and a half, and that'll get you through most ceremonies. It'll get you through any ceremony that I've ever recorded. This camera here, this has a 5-hour battery, so that's obviously that tends to be fine as well. When it comes to filming, it's a matter of knowing what to film and how to film it and so forth. So, obviously you want to arrive at the venue as early as possible, or as early as realistically possible. Give yourself plenty of time to pick up B-roll footage, so footage of the venue, footage of perhaps guests wandering in or whatever, footage of perhaps interesting angles of the hall that the marriage is taking place in, and you'll be surprised how much B-roll you can actually pick up before the event's even started, and it's good to do that. And again, it's worth doing that with perhaps camera 2, because then again you get good quality and you've still got time to set it up before the ceremony begins. Now, What you really want to do when it comes to actually recording the ceremony itself, and I've recorded ceremonies that have lasted between sort of 10 minutes to over half an hour. So again, it's not generally been a problem to record. So if you've got a camera with an hour and a half of battery time, I would perhaps have some kind of strategy to either recharge that battery or take a spare battery for the camera. Batteries for the cameras aren't too expensive, but obviously just check to make sure they're working. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like the brand name battery for a camera. If you're using a cheapo camera like this, what you can do is you can buy a second battery that's maybe like a third party brand just as a backup, just to make sure you check that it works. It's obviously not going to have the life and longevity of the of a named brand battery, but it might just get you through in a pinch. So like I say, buy quality obviously when you can afford it, but again, if you can't, then maybe a third party brand battery might do the job. Like I say, this camera can record up to 5 hours, so I'm generally okay for batteries. I've always got at least this camera, if no other camera. But I've never had a problem with battery. And sometimes you know it's possible to actually find a place just to charge up a battery or charge up a secondary camera or something like that as well. So there's that. When it comes to the day, what you want to do is set all the... you want to, generally speaking, and this is a bit of a blanket statement, have the settings all on auto. Unless the hall is particularly dark or the lighting is particularly obtuse, the auto functions will almost always work, and they'll almost always adjust accordingly. They'll adjust the white balance, they'll adjust the exposure, they'll adjust all the necessary bits and pieces. But it's one less thing to worry about. Any time when the auto function doesn't necessarily cover everything, you can adjust this in editing. That's the thing. You can spend plenty of time editing, just as long as you actually pick up a reasonable quality footage as you're actually recording it. That's the thing that you actually really want to do on the day is just make sure it's recorded. And make sure it's recorded reasonably, acceptably speaking. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be in a way where you can actually fix any problems in post. So with that in mind, when shooting things, it's always worth shooting wider than necessary. So it might look like you're more zoomed out than you need to be, but it's better to be more zoomed out than sort of too zoomed in, as it were. Especially when it comes to putting, say, camera 1, which will generally be unattended, and it'll be focusing on the bride and the groom from near the point of view of the registrar, so it'll be the other side of the bride and groom than the audience, the family members and the attendees are on. That'll be unattended, so you want to make sure that that's generally as wide as possible, and it's easily going to capture everyone in. Now, obviously, if you talk things through with the bride and the groom on the day, and you talk things through with the registrar, there's a good chance that they will make the effort to actually be at least within the window. Obviously, the majority of people there aren't going to be in the business of being in cameras and stuff like that, but they will most likely. In a lot of cases, they may actually just sort of make sure that they're in the window. So what these cameras are actually particularly good at is that they've actually got, obviously, the reversible window. So make sure that if the camera is set up in the corner of the room, that people can see themselves in the window, so they can actually set themselves up. So that just, it's just an extra thing for other people to do. The filming itself, by and large, isn't too big of a deal. If you just keep all the cameras on and try not to fiddle with them too much, it's gonna drive you mad. Trust me, you're gonna want to make sure everything's pointed just so. Generally speaking, like I say, shoot wide. Don't necessarily adjust mid-shot, because you never know what bit of footage that you might end up wanting to use. I've actually had to ditch some really good footage from a really good sort of camera angle simply because what was actually being said was something really good, but I was actually just adjusting the camera position at the time, and it just looked too amateurish to actually include that in the final cut, which was a real shame. So what you want to do is just shoot wide as possible and just leave it and keep it still, right? Again, this is where this secondary backup camera comes into play. If you think that your current camera isn't capturing everything, or if there is perhaps a better angle, or you want to get something zoomed in, just pull out your pocket camera, zoom right in, and then you've got 2 shots. It's better to have 2 shots. Obviously, you're only going to ever end up using 1 in the final cut, but yeah, that's kind of like that's kind of the strategy that I go with anyway. Now, when it comes to filming, what do you actually film? So the big ones, of course, are the ceremony itself. The usually you have like the bride's father's speech, you have the groom's speech, and then you have the best man's speech. Sometimes you have extra speeches, or sometimes you have less speeches. Sometimes, I guess. But whatever it is, you want to get those kind of speeches down. This can actually kind of be a little bit difficult in how you put them together in post, so I'll talk about that later on. But when it comes to, so you've got the ceremony, you've got the speeches, and then you want to get all the B-roll as possible. Now these are little things like getting the bride stepping out of the car if she's arriving, or the bride arriving, and then just general sort of footage that you can kind of sort of cut away to or fade away to and then fade back to. Is what you kind of want to get as well. Get as much B-roll as possible. I only ever end up using 10% of the B-roll that I end up picking, but you definitely want to get more than you'll end up using, just so that you have more of a choice, if nothing else. Just as a bit of a side note, a bit of a tangent, if you're wondering what that noise is in the background, it's just raining particularly heavily, and I just thought that might actually come out on a camera, might come out quite poorly on camera, so I just thought I'd let you know, just as a side note. When it comes to filming as well, it's worth filming the ceremony, it's worth filming the speeches. Once the speeches are over, I tend to have a policy of turning the cameras off at that point. Might be worth having this in your pocket for their first dance, which tends to be like a couple of hours after the speeches. Obviously, each wedding's its own, and you've got to adjust accordingly. But generally speaking, once the speeches are over, I put the cameras away, because that's kind of like private party moments as well. That's when people sort of start drinking, and you don't want to get really any of that on camera, or at least I don't. Part of it's like I consider that maybe a little bit of an invasion of privacy when people are maybe a little more vulnerable, or sort of expressing themselves perhaps more privately, as it were. It's not good to have cameras about there. It just gets a little bit overbearing, and then it starts to infringe on other people's enjoyment of the event. So at that, like I said, the speeches, it's worth just closing off the cameras there. Obviously, talk to the bride and groom if you want to get the last dance on. It's generally not that big a deal. There's usually family taking photos and stuff there as well. Sometimes it's a nice clip to close your video off on, but it's not the most important thing. But yeah, like I say, it's just respectful to the occasion to actually turn your camera to know when not to film, as well as to know when to film. I know that it's kind of an impulse just to record as much as possible, and then just deal with it later. But again, as a cameraman, I've learned that you really, in a lot of ways, have to be a bit of a ghost. You have to blend into the surroundings. You can't be up in people's faces. So it's definitely worth just sort of giving people a bit of space at that point. Like I say, as well, after people have been drinking, you want them to sort of enjoy the event, and putting cameras there just is a little bit overbearing. So that's it when it comes to filming. Up until the speeches, record as much as you really can. Don't get in the business of putting cameras in everyone's faces. Bearing in mind, of course, it's the bride and the groom's day, and ultimately the footage that you will end up using is of the bride, of the groom, obviously of the couple together, and B-roll, which is things like the outside, people as crowds. You don't. I've seen a lot of wedding videos try and film sort of interviews with individuals at the wedding. I don't think that's a good idea. I think that works out particularly terribly. I think it's cheesy, it's corny, and it's effectively the videographer trying to do more than what's really asked of them. The wedding should be a visual piece, and it should sort of be an honest representation of the event. So anyway, I've talked about the equipment that I use and the equipment that I recommend. I've talked about the preparation of the wedding video, and I've talked about the filming of it and when not to film. Now I'm actually going to split this video into two parts. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the editing and the post-processing and a few additional thoughts on it. So that's about it from me today. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in part 2.